History shows that when a religion is closely associated with politics, more often than not, we are on a very slippery slope. This often leads to discrimination, persecution, and violence. Then there is the notion of jihad, which we have heard about this morning. Jihad and qital. Jihad is a very broad concept, and like qital can only be an armed struggle. So at one end, jihad implies warfare. The Quran says to the Muslim community, warfare is ordained for you, though it is hateful unto you. But on the other hand, jihad can be also understood in spiritual terms. The Prophet said, the mujahid carries out jihad against his own soul. Al-mujahid man jahada nafsahu. So here it is about spiritual warfare. And then there are Muslim reformers who talk about social jihad, jihad against illiteracy, corruption, oppression of women and children, all the social evils. And this reminds me of this prophetic word. The best jihad is when a word of justice is proclaimed before a despotic sultan or an unfair prince. أفضل الجهاد كلمة عدل عند سلطان جائر أو أمير جائر. So does violence in Islam has anything to do with Islamic sources? Because we hear that Islam has nothing to do with violence, or that Islam is a violent religion. Well, I would like to suggest that violence shown by self-proclaimed Muslims have something to do with Islam. You only need to listen to their speeches and discourse. So the first Islamic sources is, of course, the Quran. There are some very important verses in the Quran, such as the verse about the throne of God, Ayatul Kursi, or the verse about light, Ayatul Nur. We have also the verse about the sword, Ayatul Sayf. And this is what we read in Ayatul Sayf in Quran chapter 9, which was revealed about 2 years after the Prophet moved from Mecca to Medina. Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor in the last day, nor hold that forbidden which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are of the people of the book, that is, Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya, the poll tax, with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Then we have in the hadith the teaching and the deeds of the Prophet. We have books about jihad, precisely about maghazi, military expeditions, jizya or poll tax, etc. And martyrdom is praised in the Quran and in the hadith. And I just want to read this hadith, which I have actually often heard referred to by radical Muslims. God's messenger said, the martyr will receive from God a sevenfold price. His sins will immediately be forgiven. He will see his place in paradise as soon as he is killed. He will be spared the punishment of the tomb. He will not face the great anxiety on Judgment Day. He will have on his head the crown of dignity, each part of which is worth more than this life and all its treasures. He will be given 72 Huri wives, and on Judgment Day he will be granted the privilege of interceding in favor of 70 people among his relatives. And then we have the prophetic model. You know that after Muhammad and his community moved from Mecca to Medina, the Muslim community grew in number, and Muhammad took on a political and military role as well as a prophetic role. And this is what he says in one of the hadith books. And this is a saying that is often actually repeated in the hadith. I have been commanded to wage war against people, nas in Arabic, as long as they do not say there is no God but God. As soon as they make this confession, I have no rights over their lives and possessions unless they commit an offense against God's law. They are accountable only to God. And then we have the Islamic tradition. According to Muslim theologians who lived in the Middle Ages, the world falls into three houses: the house of peace, the house of war, and the house of covenant. So Muslims, have to expect to wage war against non-Muslim nations unless there have been a truce treaty signed between them. And then we have among the Muslim communities some Muslims who would excommunicate other Muslims who do not share their views. So the Shia and the Sunni are one example. And if you excommunicate a fellow Muslim, it means that you are allowed to fight against them. And this is how we can understand Muslims fighting against fellow Muslims. Because not all of them, not all those who say they are Muslims are genuinely Muslims. In Islamic theology, non-Muslims are seen as primarily unbelievers rather than as neighbors. In fact, we do not have in Islam the concept of neighbor, qarib, meaning a person who is neither identical to you nor entirely different. Islamic history, we know that the Prophet was involved in Medina in several wars, and then his first successor, Abu Bakr, carried out what is known as Hurub al-Ridda, because many Arab tribes wanted to revert to Islam. And then, of course, Islamic conquests, which followed. Within 100 years of the death of the Prophet in 732, for the first time, the Muslim army was defeated in central France, in Poitiers. 1389 is the famous Battle of Kosovo, when the Ottoman army defeated the Serbian army. 1453, when Constantinople fell to the Ottomans. Vienna in Austria was besieged twice by the Ottomans, etc. However, and this is important, however, we need to remember that there is also what I would call the inclusive teaching of the Quran. There is no compulsion in religion. لا إكراه في الدين. Argue with the people of the book in the best possible way. لا تجادلوا أهل الكتاب بالتي هي أحسن. Jews and Christians have nothing to fear about the day of judgment. Muslim men can marry Jewish or Christian women. Islamic da'wah, Islamic mission, da'wah means inviting people through good exhortation and wisdom, says the Quran. Religious diversity is even seen as ordained by God, human diversity as well. And this inclusive teaching of the Quran was captured in what is known as the common word between us and you, which was issued in 2007 by 138 Muslim scholars and leaders, inviting Christian community to work with them in order to make a difference in the world. Because they said together we make more than half of the population. And they say this is based on our common belief in one God and on our common commandment to love God and one's neighbor. And then in January 2016, this year, we had 300 Muslim scholars who got together in Marrakesh, in Morocco, together with 50 Christian representatives.